Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for spending part of your Thursday with us here at the Sure Resource Center. Today, we're going to be talking about the facilities and beyond, describing your institutional setting. Our presenter is Lou Hurst. Lou is a Senior Proposal Development Officer in our Proposal Development Office here at University of Kentucky. She works with faculty across our campus in working many different ways with different aspects of grants. She was actually just telling us that she's actually also teaching in our graduate school about doing some lectures on grant writing there as well. But she's also a really actively involved with our Sure Resource Center as well. So Lou, thanks a lot for joining us today and at the presentation. A couple of things before we go ahead and get started. This webinar is being recorded, and give us a couple of days, but several days afterwards, we'll get the recording processed and we'll publish it on our YouTube channel. And all of you who have registered for the course, we'll send an email out letting you know that the presentation is available on our YouTube channel. You can also always look at our website and access this presentation as well as all the other presentations as well. Just to remind people, if they don't know, we also have another presentation a week from today, next Thursday. Barb Duncan, who is also a member of our Proposal Development Office, is going to be talking about the new format for the NIH BioSketch called Science CV. And I think that's another really important topic. And today's topic, I think, is really important as well. When reviewers are looking at grants, obviously they're going to be looking at the research that you're proposing, but they also really want to make sure that your institution that you're setting has all the resources and equipment and everything else that is necessary for you to actually carry out the experiments as well. So this is an important component of all NIH grants, including the R16 grant. And so Lou is going to be telling us, giving us a presentation, and there'll be time at the end of her presentation for active Q&A as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lou.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, and I hope today's session will be helpful, but also maybe fun and interesting about a commonly overlooked topic of grants. And so our objectives for today are to talk kind of broadly about why place matters for research at all. Why do funders care about this? We'll talk about where to find data to build your facilities descriptions, and we're going to talk in general about how to describe your institutional environment in a way that's clear and effective and compelling that will make your proposal more competitive. So to get started, when we first hear we think about describing our institutional setting, we'll hone in, of course, on the facilities and other resources document for good reason. And so just to start with that, when we look at our basic instructions that NIH gives us for what to include in this document in the SF 424, this is the language that they give you. And what I want to focus on is probability of success. So you're supposed to describe how the scientific environment where your project will happen will contribute to the probability of success, and they emphasize how will the studies benefit from features of the scientific environment. So they want you to describe those features. They're also interested in unique subject populations where applicable. So what is unique about the populations that you can reach and access because of where your institution is located? And they also are interested in useful collaborative arrangements. So we'll be talking about those things. Notice they say too that if the project is going to be happening at multiple sites, they want a discussion of the resources available at each site. There's special instructions for projects that have early stage investigators. And in those cases, they're especially interested in knowing about how the institution is a good place for this investigator to grow and have a promising career. And is that institution invested in their success? So when they are wondering about that institutional investment, they're asking about resources. But also various types of support. So collegial support, are there programs and guidance and mentoring and supervision, but also logistical support. So the administrative offices and other offices that will help that research be successful, and financial support, including things such as protected time. So these are the reasons that NIH cares about this. And more broadly, I want us to to think about, why does place matter overall? If we stop and consider, those of us on this call are from many different institutions and locations, and the place where we are is kind of by definition unique. So how can we talk about that uniqueness, and how can we leverage that uniqueness in our proposals, and why does it matter? So in any grant proposal, not just for NIH, but any funder, you can really use place and talk about place to emphasize, on the one hand, your research problem itself. Why is it significant? Is it a problem that kind of exists because of where you're located? But also, as we've seen, we care about it for the likelihood of success with the project. So how is the place where you're located going to make you more likely to succeed? But funders may also be interested because of the potential for impact. Where you're situated and who you have contact with, that affects how a successful project can be more impactful, and also whether it can be sustainable in the future. And funders may be interested in it by virtue of their own goals. So they may have goals related to place. They may want to have impacts in certain targeted areas of the country. They may want to spread out their investments geographically. So they can care about it for all of those reasons. A key point is, when you are talking about place, and you need to always tie it to your actual project objectives. So when you are describing the setting, it's good to include explicit language to explain why that matters for the specific project that you're doing. Why does it create new opportunities to do new work, or why does it show that you can do that work more effectively? We also want to think about different aspects of place. So that can include something as broad as just the geography. Where is your institution situated? We'll talk about that a little more. That can matter for the actual science that's done or can be done in that place, but also who it can impact. But we're also thinking about the institution as an organization, how it's organized, how it's structured, what partnerships does it have, what networks does it exist in. And then we think about the infrastructure itself, the physical characteristics of the institution, and what resources it can access there. What are the campuses and what are the facilities? So let's think about these things. And also, when we consider the institutional environment, let's keep in mind that that environment contains, on the one hand, tangible aspects, things that you can touch and describe, objects, concrete things like buildings, spaces, the equipment and the materials, and the physical geography. But there's also a lot of aspects of the environment that are intangible, and those are things like the range of expertise that exists at your institution, the overall research activity, what's actually being done there and at what scale and what volume. The existing relationships and collaborations are extremely important. Those are things that you can document, but they don't necessarily exist in a concrete place. Also, just a general sense of community and rapport and support that may exist in a unique way at your institution. So those are the things that we hopefully want to capture, because those are important for NIH and for other funders. We also want to consider that these things can matter differently for different types of projects. So for a single investigator project like an NIH R-Series project, the environment matters on the one hand for showing the feasibility of the work, showing that you can do it, but also highlighting what resources and what opportunities exist by virtue of that setting that are unique and make it an especially compelling project. But if it's a collaborative project where there may be multiple institutions involved or multiple sites, that environment matters, and the different environments matter because you want to highlight what's unique about the contributions of different team members who may be located in different places. And it also can help with clarifying the roles of different people at different places that are involved in this project. For fellowships or career development projects, or anything that is focused on an individual and how they will grow and how they'll learn, it's very important there to show, as we've seen, that the institution is invested in that candidate and that at that institution or in that place, they have the resources that they need to train and to develop. And if there's anything unique about that environment, like, again, unique populations to work with, or unique equipment that may exist here that gives them a unique training opportunity, that's something that you will want to highlight. If it's a group training project, so a whole cohort is training at once, those same things pertain, but it's also helpful in those cases to show that there's many different opportunities for mentorship. So there's a wide range of faculty that the students or the cohort can work with, and that there's a general strength and a richness and a synergy. People work well together in that research environment. So that's extremely important for those types of projects. And lastly, for a capacity building project where the entire purpose of it is to invest in this institution or this location and make it better able to sustain future research, it's very important to give a deep characterization of what is existing in the current environment to show what they currently need, but also what their goals are for future growth and whether they can sustain those goals. So we're here through the NIH SURE program, and this is a good time now to talk about the fact that NIH has recently updated not exactly how they describe their review criteria, but how they organize those into a new framework. So previously, before January of this year, you're probably familiar with the categories of significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment, and those were all scored, and those are all still relevant and important, and people still write their applications, including sections for those. But what NIH has done is reorganize those 5 criteria into 3 factors, and only the first 2 of those factors receive a numerical score. So factor 1, importance of the research, that has been phrased as should this research be done, that big question, and that is where questions of the significance of the research and its innovation are considered, and that is scored. Factor 2 for rigor and feasibility includes the criterion of approach, and also other information here, and that's also scored. Then factor 3 that contains expertise and resources, that one is not scored, but it is considered in the overall impact score. And that one contains the criteria of investigators and environment, and it's meant to be evaluated kind of on a yes or no, is it adequate or is it not adequate? And if there are gaps, explain those. So one rationale that NIH has presented for rearranging things in this way is to make sure that there's not undue bias or preference for specific investigators that have a high reputation, or an institution that has a higher reputation. Now that won't receive like an extra good numerical score, but we should ideally consider just whether or not the expertise and resources are adequate. If so, that should be sufficient. So we'll see if that has the goal of kind of establishing a fair playing field for different types of institutions, as long as they are able to show that they can do the work adequately. So yes, if we look more closely at this factor 3, and this includes investigators and environment. So this environment category, where they ask reviewers to evaluate whether the institutional resources are appropriate to ensure the successful execution of the proposed work. So that is where we most solidly consider the facilities and other resources document to be relevant. However, I also want you to keep in mind that institutional setting, with those different aspects that we've talked about, being a little more broad than just the facilities, but also just where the institution is located, in different ways, kind of depending on the type of the project, and how you want to convey the significance to your funder, and maybe who your funder is. The institutional setting can also factor into factor 1, the importance of the research, and also into rigor and feasibility. So it's not necessarily a clear division of facilities only gets thought about under factor 3. It can factor into the others as well. So if we think about other parts of the NIH application other than the facilities document where your setting can be relevant, first of all, there's a lot of forms that you will simply fill out, and those are important. You don't have much room for description there, but they do ask for place in those places. With equipment, you do have an equipment document. If you have any equipment that's relevant to the project, you're asked to describe its location and its pertinent capabilities. So even where the equipment is located is kind of important for NIH to understand, to see whether it will be useful to you, and whether it contributes to your research. The research strategy, there's actually multiple places where the place and the setting of your research can be important. Again, depending on the nature of your project, it can factor into the background, the significance and methodology, factor into the qualifications of the team. Team members may actually be located in different institutional settings. They may have received some of their training and their own professional background in different settings that give them a certain kind of expertise. So you can talk about that as well. It may factor into recruitment approaches if it's a project that that involves recruiting subjects. For career development or fellowships, there's candidate information where there needs to be an extensive discussion of what the institutional environment is and institutional commitment, as we've mentioned. So setting matters there as well. It can also feature into the personal documents like bio sketches. So as part of your career, you will have worked in multiple different institutional settings, and in some of those places you've been exposed to different training opportunities, and you may have made decisions like pivotal career decisions based on putting yourself in different types of settings. So that can be important here. For research training programs for multiple trainees, and you talk about your plans for instruction, they're being instructed in a certain place, so setting matters there. Also letters of support, if these are collaborators or partners that have their own resources in their different settings, that can matter, and institutional letters, of course. So consider how setting can matter for all of these parts of the application, so not just the facilities document. And let's talk about the SURE program specifically, why we're here, what the purpose of it is, and how setting kind of builds into the goals of the SURE program, and how you can be responsive when you talk about this in your application. So the SURE program is meant to support research capacity building. So this is a type of capacity building project that does give single investigator awards, but it is targeting certain institutions and investigators at those institutions. So that factors into eligibility for SURE, but it's also part of the purpose for SURE. It's also an important part of the SURE program that students are provided with research opportunities. So it targets institutions that have students that can receive baccalaureate or graduate degrees in biomedical sciences. And this program cares a lot about making sure that these students are well trained. It also wants to enhance the institutional research culture and enrich the research environment. So SURE, by its very nature, is very focused on what the research environment currently is, whether it's conducive to achieve these goals, and whether the SURE program can help in improving that environment for training purposes. For the R16 mechanism, under the SURE program, the instructions for facilities and other resources are given here. You're referred to the SF424 basic instructions, but there's also special information that talks about the fact that it's expected that the majority of the experiments that you apply for through the R16 will be conducted at the applicant institution, because SURE mechanisms are targeting specific types of institutions. So it's expected that the investment will go to those institutions. If there is work that's going to be done on a limited basis at other institutions, that needs to be justified. And if there's any work that will be done at a different institution, you should describe those resources and describe those institutions as well. Notice also that under the research strategy, there's, and this again is from the NOFO for the SURE and also for the SURE First, there's instructions, special instructions for the R16, including the student involvement plan. So since that's an important part of SURE, you have to show that you are thoughtful and careful about involving students in the research. And there's a note that if your institution does have formal training plans that affect such students, that's not appropriate to put here, but you can include that as part of the facilities and other resources section. So that's what we want to know about. And then for the R16 mechanism, there's other attachments that are required as well. And these also will require a thoughtful consideration of what unique resources exist at your institution. So there's 2 institutional letters, one that's focused on strategic plan for building research capacity to show that the institution does want to build its own capacity through SURE. That's the program purpose. And another institutional letter that specifies support for the specific PI or PD's research career. And then finally, for the SURE First mechanism specifically, there's an additional attachment required to talk about the PI's research enhancement plan. So these are other attachments that you will have worked on or will work on if you apply for the R16 mechanism. So think about how place and institutional environment are critical for those documents. Under the scored review criteria from the NOFO, this is the same as what we saw before under factor 3, with the additional language here about students. And so reviewers are asked to assess whether it's likely that students will be available to participate in the research project, and they need to evaluate plans for informing students of those opportunities. So just to underscore that student involvement is critical to the program, and that needs to be captured when you are talking about your institutional environment, because that's weighed under factor 3. So talking about the actual document itself and how to organize and build it, note that there's no page limit for this document. It's typical to have a document anywhere from 2 to 5 pages, maybe getting longer for a more complex and large project, but still a good 2 pages is a good place to start for a modest single investigator project. You have multiple options for how you want to organize the document. One way that you can do that is to group it by the main activities that you are undertaking for your project. So if you have an activity like cell culture and image processing or other activities, you group it under these headings, and then you can describe what are the facilities that are associated with each of those activities. Another way that you can do it, especially if you have multiple distinct sites where the work will be done, is to actually list those different locations and have headings for each of those, and then just describe what is contained in each of those locations. So these are 2 options. There's other ways that you might approach this, but you have some latitude there. Do remember throughout, however, that you need to focus on what you will actually use during the project. So not just a long list of all the things that are located there, but something that's thoughtful and curated and tailored to the project activities that you have described throughout. It's also good to make sure you include explicit statements in each of these sections that tie the location to the actual activities that you'll do. So you might even point back to different aims for different ones of your specific aims for each of these sections. Just make sure that everything that you say about the setting is clearly relevant to your project activities. So you can add notes and commentary, and it's also helpful here to state or to have some discussion if there's anything that potentially might give reviewers pause or make them uncertain about whether the work can be done, or whether some aspect of the environment is a weakness for the type of work. Any concerns, you can talk about special arrangements that you've made. You can talk about past successes that you've had doing similar activities in these same spaces. Anything that you feel you need to expand on that may be important to help your reviewers fairly assess whether your location is appropriate for the work you're proposing. So those are sections that you can include, but I also would recommend that it's helpful to open the facilities document with the overall description of your institution itself, assuming that's, the place where the majority of the work would be done. If there actually are multiple institutions, again, that should be limited for an R16 project. But in cases where that does happen, you may have an overview of multiple institutions. But when you talk about the institution, consider things like its actual history, mission, purpose, and values. This can help kind of show your funder that your institution is a place that's aligned with the mission and purpose of the funder themselves. You can talk about the geographical setting and its arrangement or disposition, like are there multiple campuses in different cities, what is the urban environment, or is this an isolated campus? A sense of that environment, talk about the size, so numbers of students or faculty or staff, just to give a sense of the scale of your institution, if it's one that your funder may not have heard of or your viewers may not have heard of, or be familiar with. Have there been any recent changes at your institution that are worth discussing, that are relevant to the context of your project, like a recent expansion, relocation? Has there been a change in leadership? Anything like that worth mentioning? Does it have any special classifications or designations, whether internally or through a national body, that might be relevant? What are its key operations and activities? What does it specialize in? What does it do a lot of? What is it known for? Existing partnerships, relationships, those can be immensely important for just showing that you have a strong network to help support your project, and that you can have a broad reach. It shows that you have a lot of potential for growth and potential research opportunities. Talk about the research volume, research activity and strengths, areas of strength, maybe some past highlights of your research activity, but also talk about the support infrastructure as it exists at your institution. What offices do you have to support research? Administrative offices, but also things like libraries and IT support. So that's important for characterizing your institution and introducing it to your funder, but also consider an overview of the college, where you're located, or your department or your center or some other academic unit, maybe in slightly less detail, but in a similar way, to help give context to how this work, how the work that you're doing is well supported by that academic unit. These are some things to think about. Some of them will be more or less relevant depending on what type of project you're doing, but these are things that you don't want to overlook if they are critical to the project. So if it's a lab project, of course, discuss in detail the space available to do that work, square footage, furniture, designated areas. If there's any equipment that exists that you, and again, this is equipment that currently exists, not that you're making a request for, but anything that you need for your experiment. What are its specifications? Are there adaptations that you will make or have needed to make to do the specific work? What about the maintenance? How can you ensure that the equipment will stay in good working order? You have a maintenance schedule or a plan for computers, especially if your project involves a lot of software or statistical analysis, but almost all of us use computers for some aspect of our project. So talk about that software, databases that you have access to or will get access to, IT support. Talk about your scholarly and academic resources. Are there any spaces where special activities may happen? Like, do you have adequate meeting rooms? If that's a key part of your project, conference areas, clinical areas, and then infrastructure. So things that just kind of keep your campus running, or the wider area where the project will be done. So transportation, utilities, connectivity, all those sorts of things. Also think about those same elements, but think about these in different ways. So when you may list lots of different items, but think about those spatially and make sure that your viewers can understand how close together or far apart things are, what is adjacent to what is co-located in the same place. That can be very important for understanding how easy it is to just logistically get a project done, or what opportunities you may have. Think about access. So for instance, if there's a certain facility, are there some rules that affect how often you can use it, when you can use it? Is there sharing that happens? Is there an agreement for how things are shared? And talk about the people that exist in these places, like in general, how many people are in a certain place, how crowded is it, how exclusive is it, what are the roles of these people, what expertise do they have, and how do they work with each other? That can be important, for instance, to kind of characterize the environment in a specific research lab as a good place for a new trainee to quickly get acclimated and to feel at home, or to to find someone with relevant expertise. And always talk about the support that's available, programming that may already exist, and human resource support, administrative support, all types of assistance that are at your institution that you can leverage if needed. And I mentioned before that you always want to think about intangible aspects of the research environment as well. So we've mentioned some of those. You might think about institutional ranking or reputation, if that's relevant and if it's something that you want to talk about. There may be a specific area, for instance, a specific niche, and it may be something that you are working in specifically for this project, where your institution is well known as an expert or as being a leader or at the forefront of a certain area. You may be part of the lab or the team that pioneered a certain technique or is at the vanguard of a certain area of research, may be located at your institution. So there's that kind of energy from innovation that you can talk about or leverage. You can talk about opportunities that people have. So these can be trainees or new faculty, or anyone has for just socializing and building rapport and feeling connected to a scientific community. That can be important for keeping morale up and making sure that a project comes through well. You can talk about the organizational philosophy. So does your institution have certain values that it not only expresses in its communications, but also that it operationalizes through certain policies or practices. That's an important part of the environment where the research happens. And always talk about current and potential relationships with the surrounding community. And that can be the actual neighborhoods where the campus is located, but it can also include industry or community organizations or nonprofits or anything that's just existing in the same place that's not necessarily part of the institution, but that the institution touches. So always remember that your institution doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of it's part of the fabric of a community, a city, or a state, or a region, and think about how that might be relevant to the research that you're doing. And in that spirit, when you talk about the location where your institution is, some of these things that they may be directly relevant to the science of your project, and you may go into great detail, but even when they're not, they do kind of help build the context of what work you're doing and how it may be potentially impactful, how it may factor into the priorities of your institution or of your department, or a lot of faculty members that maybe work at your institution. So the local and regional demographics. For example, are you living in a place that's rapidly gaining population, and that could influence what students you recruit at your institution or what faculty you might recruit. Economic indicators, these can sometimes be a major factor in just how the institution operates and what kinds of partnerships that it tends to have. If you are working in biomedicine, you will if you are applying to NIH, but for many health-related projects, it's important to think about the location in terms of health indicators, morbidity, mortality, health conditions. These can have a huge effect on how the institution decides to strategize the research that it does, and also the faculty that decide to come to that institution to do work. Often it is driven by health indicators in that area, or healthcare access or shortages. And then again, the physical geography might be relevant for certain types of projects, but again, helps to put context to the kind of work that you're doing. How is the land used around that institution? What are the natural resources that are there? How has that maybe driven the economy, or given context to the kinds of people that live in this location? If you feel that you need to build out that context a little bit more, these are some data sources that you could potentially use to talk about all kinds of different aspects of where you're located. And these here are all part of the federal statistical system. So you can go to the site and browse various kinds of data assets and search for either raw data or data points or specific facts about the place where you're located that might be helpful to you. And then you might even go into some social trends or public opinions or anything that might give context to the type of project that you're doing, but also kind of give a sense of the flavor of the area where you are. And these are some other sources you can go to for that. Lastly, don't forget that sometimes local community organizations or regional organizations might publish needs assessments or other types of reports that might be helpful to give context to your area, maybe in terms of, for instance, health conditions in your area or what people in your area are concerned about that you may want to talk about. I also want to mention that for your facilities document, you may want to include some visual elements. Those are a great thing to include for any grant proposal, but especially for your facilities document. They can help clarify what you're talking about if you're describing a building or describing how buildings are arranged or how close they are together. So it can clarify your text, and it also just makes your project more memorable. It makes reviewers notice and think about your specific project and remember your project and kind of put it into the context of their mind. So when you think about your facilities document, consider including photos of buildings, of places, of equipment that may be located in these places. You might consider maps as relevant, diagrams to show how things are located, even floor plans, anything that you can do to help reviewers not just visualize what you're proposing to see if it's feasible, but also it's important to make them visualize you actually doing this project in the location where you are. So visualize you being successful at the project. So sometimes these visual elements can be very important for that. So I then wanted to just give some examples, and these are taken from my own institution, University of Kentucky, but you can translate this to wherever your institution is to see if there's something analogous or if there's something that you would want to include. So this is language that's taken from our facilities description library. So this is a resource that we have, which is a repository of descriptions of all of our facilities. So you may have something like that at your institution. You may be in a position to help start a repository like this if you have one, because this can be used kind of campus-wide and tailored for specific projects, but it's a collection of facts and descriptions. So this language here describes that we are one of only 8 U.S. institutions that has academic medical center with 6 health science colleges and full spectrum of academic colleges. So this is something that's relatively unique about our campus, that there's a co-location of all of these different units. And this is something that's helpful to talk about if we're saying that UK is a good place to do interdisciplinary research from multiple different combinations of disciplines, that we have this all of these campuses co-located. And if that was especially important, we might want to emphasize this by showing a map where all of the colleges are located. So there's something like that. Here's another description from that library that talks about our Center of Excellence in Rural Health. And it shows it was established by the state in 1990. So there's some history attached to that. That center is located not where our main campus is, but it's in Hazard, Kentucky, which is in the heart of the Appalachian coal fields, as this says. So that gives some characterization of why it's located there, why it's helpful that it is there and can access that population. And the purpose of its establishment was to address health disparities in rural Kentucky and unique challenges faced by rural communities. So to the extent that that is aligned with what the funder's own mission and what they are interested in and maybe appropriate to the funding program, that's something that's important for us to bring forward and to describe and explain. This is a description, and this is just taken from the website, and this is an example of something that might be worth including. But this is the Advanced Science and Technology Commercialization Center within the engineering complex. So we talk about how it's located, and there's also information about the history when it opened, the investment from EDA and Small Business Administration, the size, the project, and its past history. So this kind of description might might be helpful again to give context to show that the institution has a history of caring about a certain type of research and has facilities in place to encourage that and has been successful. This is an example. So this is taken from a closed resource or that we have through campus, but it houses files about our specific facilities. So this is the College of Law. There's a image. This is a relatively recent construction on our campus. And you can also find there the overhead map if it was important to show how it's located to other buildings, and then even a floor plan. So as relevant, if you can get your hands on those sorts of documents at your institution, and if you need to, you can include those sorts of things in a facilities document. This is to show that you can go to Carnegie classifications, and there's a range of information there that can help compare UK against other institutions, just to give a sense of scale and size and capabilities. So this is kind of a standard way that many universities and other institutions characterize themselves academically and as part of their surrounding communities. And this last example, this is just something that's taken from our local government's economic development page. And this is, you know, the kind of thing you may see on a local page of like a commerce organization. And not all of this is going to be relevant to many types of projects, but it may be potentially interesting if you are trying to make the claim that you can recruit new faculty or recruit students that will want to stay in a certain place. But more to the point, it's to just emphasize that where your campus is located is part of a city, is part of a community, and sometimes it's necessary to take some data about that wider community to fully explain where you are and how you can do that research. So hopefully these are some helpful examples of ways that you can look for that kind of information to include and how it can be relevant. So our takeaways for today are first just that institutional setting matters in many ways for different aspects of your proposed project and also for different types of projects. So there's reasons that the institutional setting in some way is often considered an evaluation criterion by NIH, but also for many other funders. So hopefully you've thought about that. Remember that setting has many different dimensions. So it is the institution itself as a physical entity, but also its partnerships and its links to its surrounding area. Always in your descriptions, make sure to tie the setting to your project goals and explain how it is relevant and conducive to completing your project goals. But you can be creative about doing that. Be sure to describe both the tangible and the intangible resources at your institution, because all of those are unique in different combinations, but they're important for your project. And make sure to help reviewers visualize your setting, again, for clarity, to clarify anything that reviewers may not understand through your descriptions. You can bring in visual elements sometimes to include that, but it's also important for reviewers to visualize you doing the work so that they can, it helps build your credibility and makes them think that you can be successful with this, and even helps kind of build a emotional response of wanting to root for you and invest in your project in the place where you're located. So I hope this has been helpful to you. There's plenty of time for questions if anyone has some, or comments. I'd love to hear if anyone has comments or thoughts about their own institutions and how to describe it.
Great. Thanks very much, Lou, for all that information. That's really helpful. There are some questions in the chat and in the Q&A. The chat had, it wasn't live the whole time, but it is now. So feel free to use these for your questions. And I'll go ahead, I'll read the questions for Lou. Kat, Paul Murphy, and I are also here to help as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first question is, can you please comment on how we can mention on institutional programs that are targeted for certain disadvantaged undergraduate student groups? And again, sometimes that we can utilize these groups for student recruitment.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I was looking at a different question, I think slightly in the chat. So yes, that's a common question that comes up about if you do have existing groups that talk about existing categories of students, and you may be concerned about whether the funder will allow you to talk about those. That's something, especially now, that you want to watch and think about specifically. And if you have groups that you want to name, generally speaking, you are always going to want to talk about factual groups that do exist to support communities of students. But you will want to keep aware of, changing guidelines or priorities that may exist through your funder, and look for information about that, and also in the institutions. Do you have guidance you would want to give on that, Dr. Spear?
Well, I think one of the points that's important for, especially for R16 grants, and Lou, you brought this up, is that, student experience is really important for R16 grants. And so I think it's especially important for these types of grants that you emphasize things you're doing to for undergraduates who could participate in the research. Mm-hmm. So along those lines, there's some questions about, how do you reference, or do you reference, let me go back here, classifications relating to diversity. For example, if you're at a Hispanic serving institution or a minority serving institution, how do you describe that, and how do you emphasize or highlight the commitment to diversity efforts?
Right, and some of those classifications are like formal historical classifications, so they're backed up by formal systems like Carnegie and existing. And if institutional commitment to diversity efforts, there used to be the document, the Plan for Enhancing Diverse Perspectives, that's no longer required. So there's not really places or scope in the current R16 application for you to emphasize those things, and there's certainly not a need to. But if you could speak broadly about the fact that your institution does have programming and does have supports to make sure that students have a good student experience, not only professionally, but also socially, and to build community. You can talk about that in a broad way, but it's not something that you are required or maybe encouraged to emphasize in that specific way for NIH.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of a touchy subject right now. I think you have to toe the line a little bit on the word usage. But yeah, I think it's really important that all students have opportunities at your institution. So I think that's important. Paul, I know you review a lot of grants. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think one of the issues with, I don't think it necessarily hurts you in the facility section to describe things like that. I think the key thing is whether you think it's actually necessary, right? I mean, some of these, especially for the SURE program, right? You really want to show that your institution is really serving an under-resourced group, right? And yeah, you have to be somewhat careful right now with how you're going to describe that. But I mean, it generally applies in a lot of different situations. I mean, under-resourced is under-resourced. So I think describing that fairly is important to do that. What I think, I think there's a distinction. One of the things in facilities sections that doesn't do you any good but doesn't hurt you is putting in too much stuff, because a lot of times reviewers, when they look through there, say, well, it looks like you have a lot of things, and they're not going to pay an awful lot of attention to a lot of the smaller details unless it's something they're specifically looking for. So like, for example, if you were if you were proposing a human studies trial where you were specifically targeting African American or Hispanic populations as part of a health outreach or something like that, that would be important, right? To show that you have access to that population through some resource at your particular institution or something like that. But where they're not considering that for how you would recruit undergraduates into your program, because we no longer have the PADP attachment, then it's not really all that necessary. I don't think it's not going to hurt you, but it doesn't really add anything, because all we have to do now for evaluating factor 3 in grant review is just to say that it's adequate or not. So if you have extra things in there, it doesn't really add, right?
Yeah. All right, let's change subjects a little bit here. There's a question, should we include the service contracts for major instruments in the grant? And does the R16 budget cover such expenses for service contracts?
And is this for existing equipment? That you currently have?
I guess it could go for either existing equipment or perhaps equipment that you purchase as well. Let's talk about existing equipment. Let's say that you have equipment. Should you include service contracts as part of the application?
Like the entirety of the contract? I would mention that if there is a contract that exists to continue to service the equipment to make sure that it stays in good working order, that that's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
I don't know that that needs to be, absolutely included.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it's necessary because your budget's modular. I mean, certainly you can charge service contracts to the grant as part of it, and you can describe anything in there that it's, you in a facility section, you can talk about how this is a fee for service core, or if it's just equipment that you have access to. But in any case, it would still be chargeable to the grant. But because your budget is modular, you're not going to need to do anything like attach service contracts. It's different if you're buying something. If you're proposing buying a piece of equipment that you don't have, then you probably should attach it even with the modular budget, because you are going to be saying that otherwise you could get penalized for someone saying that, oh, you need this piece of equipment and I looked at your facilities and equipment sections and it doesn't seem that you have it, right? So that's a case where you would have to say something like that. But for service contracts for existing stuff, I don't think that would be absolutely necessary. Again, it's one of those things that wouldn't hurt you, but I don't think it would really matter that much for a reviewer.
Mm-hmm. Lou, here's a question. We're looking for a way to create a library that includes descriptions of departmental programs, specific labs, and equipment. Do you include that in your facilities description library, or is it only broader information about the institution?
Right, I can answer that. And we do, over time, this library has built up. And one of the good things about having such a resource is that over time, over years and decades, you can expand it as well as you want. But ours does have the level of detail where we do have specific departments described. I wouldn't say like individual investigators' labs, but definitely our cores and anything that's shared by multiple labs or multiple faculty members. We probably don't have them all done right now. We try to update them as we can, and if someone draws to our attention that we have maybe a new center that they want to be described. But we do have multiple, shared resources, and we strive to make it, as helpful as possible to multiple faculty members and other investigators across campus. Anything that more than one person is likely to want to use over time, we do build that up. So if you were just beginning, I would probably start with the broad overviews of information about the institution overall. It's helpful to get that. And then the major units and major departments. And then as you become able to, and maybe to recruit some help maybe from within the departments or other offices, you might go into finer and finer detail over time, but that can be, a work of many years. That's kind of a communal effort.
Yeah. Lou, someone asked if you could go back to the takeaway slide.
Sure.
And while you're doing that, I just want to add on to what Lou said is that, UK does have a great library and it's really a useful resource and I use it. One thing I would suggest, so when I normally take some of the documents that the office has put in, I like to try to, modify it a little bit so that it's sort of my document. I know it's really not,
Oh,
but
yeah.
so it's not just sort of a standard document, but you sort of tweak it a little bit so that it's coming from you, and it really it speaks to the things that are important for your research itself. So I think that's one thing that I find helpful.
Yes, absolutely. We encourage that tailoring, and it's just generally not a great practice at any time to do a large copy paste of a big block of text without reading through it and parsing through it. But yes, make it your own.
Right. I don't see any other questions here. I just want to remind everyone that the presentation will be available on YouTube. We do have a few more minutes. If anyone wants to raise their hand, I can unmute people if you have a question that you would like to ask in the last couple of minutes.
I'll add something really short that I think is important for how these things are reviewed. When reviewers do look at facilities thing, often what they're doing is during the review process, they're looking for something specific. So if in the proposal itself, you have a specific resource that you need, or that is going to be used for the project, or a specific piece of equipment, for example, that's the most likely thing when someone consults the facilities and equipment sections that they'll look for to see how that's. So make sure that you personalize that well and describe, your access to that resource, how it's taken care of, if it's something you need to have guaranteed access to, that, there's something in there that shows that you're able to use that. Because it's most likely that's the thing that someone will look for rather than the entire thing. Reviewers will look through the entire thing, but they'll just see, oh, this looks good. But they will focus on something that seems like you absolutely need. So make sure that part is really well polished, and it shows that you're paying attention to a specific thing that that you'll need, and the reviewers can find it.
Ali, you have a question? I've unmuted you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this very helpful presentation. I'm just following up on that service contract things, and we are facing a scenario that one of the instruments that we had in the grant has not covered by any service contract, but it needs some service now. Is it any way that I can rebudget my grant and pay for that service?
I had trouble hearing. I'm sorry.
Can you rebudget? I think what Dr. Habashi is asking, can you rebudget a grant for service contracts? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I believe it. You'd probably want to make sure with your institution if that's allowable. That institutions might have different policies about ways in which an existing grant can be rebudgeted. So I would check with your institution itself, but I think it's possible that an existing grant could be rebudgeted so that some of the funds could be used for, say, a service contract or for servicing equipment.
And the source of that rebudgeting could be, for example, the PI's effort, or because the others, I think it's very difficult to rearrange it. The only source I can see is that I can get it out of my, contribution.
Well, I mean, the issue there, right, is that you do have some constraints on PI effort that would require you to ask permission from NIH. So if you reduce the PI's effort, their funded effort by more than 25% or more, you're going to have to ask for NIH permission to reduce that to make up for the funds. And for something like SureFirst, where you have a set amount, where 6 calendar months, you might not have the resources to do that.
Thank you.
Great.
I
Lou,
saw a question. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Lou.
I was just saying, I saw a question in the chat about our library and how it's found. And I wanted to say it's housed internally, so it's behind, you have to log in with your institutional login to reach it. So it's not like publicly accessible anywhere on our website. So that might be something that you want to think about or consider when you are building up your own, whether you want those descriptions to be publicly available.
Great. Okay, we're at the top of the hour now, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So, again, Lou, thanks so much for all the information. This is incredibly helpful, and thanks for everyone for spending the hour with us. If you do have any questions, you can always reach out to our resource center. You can look at our website and find our email address there. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.